Good morning, parents. Welcome to the latest edition of our Monday morning meditation. This week, we're going to talk about generational faith and how that is actually accomplished. We're going to find this in Psalm 78. I'm going to start by reading there, Psalm 78, verses 1 through 7. And it says there, "Give ear, O my people, to my teaching. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments." Here, one of the first things we notice is that the psalmist is a corporate teacher to the people of God, and he's teaching them the story of Israel. He teaches them the story of Israel with wisdom and insight. Notice verse 2, "I'll open my mouth in a parable," or in a story. "I will utter dark sayings from of old." Dark sayings, there's mystery there, there's riddles there, and he's going to unfold those mysteries to us, the reader, so that we can learn and that we can grow. So one of the first lessons that we need to know in order to pass on this faith to the coming generation is this: we need to listen to our corporate teachers. God has given to the church, to the people of God throughout its history, teachers, in order to give wisdom and instruction to the people of God. And so we need to listen and we need to heed the instruction of our corporate teachers. We need to heed the instruction of our corporate teachers who are, of course, living, who are alive today. But we need to heed the corporate teaching of even the psalmist, right? We put ourselves as the student when we're reading Psalm 78. And we listen to our corporate teacher, for he's going to give us dark sayings from of old. He's going to give us the mysteries and what they mean, the interpretation of the passages. And so this is very important. We need to listen to our corporate teachers. And then number 2, we'll find our second point in passing on the faith to the coming generations in verse 4. It goes on to say there, "Will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done." So first we listen to our corporate teachers, and then secondly, we tell the stories of Israel to our children. So now we tell the stories of Israel that we learn from our corporate teachers to our children, and we do it with wisdom and with insight. So in other words, we don't just tell the stories of David and Joseph and Esther and Moses and the stories even of Jesus. We don't just say them verbatim, but we also give their interpretation. We also give their instruction so that our children might know the faith and understand the faith and then pass on the faith to the next generation. Here's an example of this. We tell the story of Joseph to our children. We don't just leave it there. We also talk about how, we tell our children, listen, this is what happens to the people of God. God gives to us, his children, promises, great and wonderful promises, but that doesn't mean that there's no difficulty or trial within their life. We see how Joseph goes through many trials throughout his life, even though he's a child of God and has the promises of God upon him. Now this becomes helpful for our children because they're going to grow up with the promises of God, knowing and believing the promises of God, but that doesn't exempt them from difficult trials and going through hard things. Or we might tell our children the story of Esther, for example. And in that story, we of course learn that God never gets our location wrong, that the places that he puts us have a deep purpose. And so we teach our children that the places where God has placed us, League City, Friendswood, Clear Lake, wherever it is in the surrounding areas, that it has a purpose and that God wants to use us in those areas to affect change where he has placed us. And so we learn how to tell the stories of the people of God, and we learn how to tell them with instruction and with interpretation so that our children can learn and grow in the faith. And then we come to our third point. We find in verses 5 and 6, he established a testimony in Jacob, appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children. And so what we learn here is that if we're going to pass on the faith to the coming generations, we also need to think about our grandchildren and their children. So notice here that the psalmist is thinking about the coming generations. He's thinking about his grandchildren and future children coming from them. And so we're in it for the long haul. As we're teaching our children, we're thinking about the fact that they're going to pass on this faith to their children, and they're going to pass on that faith to their children, and so on and so forth. And so we're part of this long history that goes before us, and hopefully and prayerfully, by God's grace, we'll be a part of this long future that goes ahead of us as well. And finally, we come to this fourth point of what it means to pass on the faith to the coming generations. We find this in verse 7, so that they should set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. And this fourth point, I think, is honestly maybe the most important and encouraging for us of passing on our faith to the coming generations. And that is this, is that God wants the faith to pass on to coming generation. And this is where we get our hope and encouragement, is that God actually wants our children to believe, and he wants their children to believe, and their children after them to believe. So this should encourage us and motivate us as parents that God wants the faith to pass on to coming generations. So here are these 4 points, one more time, just in summary, is we listen to our corporate teachers. Number 2, we tell the stories of the people of God to our children. Number 3, we think about our grandchildren as we tell the stories. And number 4, we remember that God wants the faith to pass on to our children and to their children after them. Well, I hope this meditation helps you this week and encourages you in your parenting. God bless.